Hello, my biohacking bestie. How are you doing? I hope everything is great. It's July. It's summertime. And I hope you're using your sunscreen, right? You're going to thank me that you did 10 years from now, I promise you. So, before we get started with the episode, which is so cool, I have so much to share about Dr. Fiona Lovely. But I want to remind you we can always watch the episodes on YouTube. Just go to YouTube at Hack My Age, and you're going to find all of the videos there. It's so cool to sometimes just go and see my guests and what they look like. And don't forget to go to the hackmyage.com website. There are so many free resources there. I've got tons of freebies on how to find a menopause doctor. I've got blog articles. There's menopause masterclasses if you're struggling with fatigue or hot flashes. There are online programs. There's the downloadable cookbook. Like I've been sharing a ton of stuff lately on Instagram and what I'm eating, and the recipes are all in there. It's also a meal planner. It's friggin' long book. And I've got the longevity master plan. And that's like a very comprehensive step-by-step plan on how to age better and longevity after menopause. So go there. And while you're on there, on the very first, on the home page, there is an online quiz, a menopause quiz to figure out where in the world are you on this journey. I still meet plenty of women every single day who have no idea what is perimenopause and what that means, and they barely know what menopause is. So don't fret, don't worry, just take the quiz and you're going to find out where you're at. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast on YouTube or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast, because when you leave a review or a star, hopefully 5 or 10, that helps bump up the ratings of the podcast so that we can get this voice out of menopause and this conversation going to other women so other women can find the podcast, as well as to help us get better podcast guests as well. I mean, we are a pretty amazing podcast guest, but we can get even better ones. So please go and do that. It's actually a small gesture. It doesn't hardly takes any time and doesn't cost you a thing, but really makes a huge impact for us. And so thank you to all of you who already have done that. I know exactly who you are because I go and read these reviews. So thank you very much. Now, in this episode today, we're going to meet Dr. Fiona Lovely, and she's a women's health functional medicine practitioner. She's totally neck deep into the brain health and menopause. And she's also, she's a chiropractor actually by training. And she told me in this episode, you're going to hear it, that she studied with the one and the only Dr. Joe Dispenza. Like that's just so cool. And if you've been following me for more than a minute, you know that I went to his weekend retreat in Barcelona back in May. I never gave the big review about it, but maybe I should tell you about it here in case you don't know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is. Also, I think he started out as a chiropractic doctor, but I first read his book probably about 2017, his first book or one of his books called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. That blew my mind. It was very scientific, talked to me in a way, in a language that I want to understand on the mind-body connection, how our thoughts and emotions, our thoughts can create emotions, emotions can trigger some hormones in the body, and those hormones can either create disease or heal or do good for us. So it just is amazing. I love the book. And then I did his online courses, and then I went to his retreat. Loved the retreat. I had a lot of fun, but the retreat itself wasn't mind blowing because everything he said in those 2.5 days, he talked about in the video. So if you guys are interested, you don't need to even go see him. I mean, it really, honestly, he does such a good job with those online videos. Download that, do the online program. I think there were like 20 plus hours of videos of understanding this mind body connection and how you can control the mind. And very often he talks about healing, like if you've got some health issues. So it's pretty powerful. Of course, you can use these techniques to manifest wealth or relationships, love, and all that. But his focus really is on healing. So he's brilliant at what he does. I've been doing his videos since February. This is 2024 we are. And although I didn't learn a whole lot of new things in that retreat, I think if I were to do it all over again, I would have just gone to the seven day, that whole week retreat. I think that's a little different. You could really dive in deep. But I was doing about 4 hours of meditation a day in these, 2.5 days sessions. And what did come out of that was that I met some really nice people. I got into this WhatsApp group, a bunch of Spanish girls who decided that, or we all decided together that we're going to commit to X number of months of Joe Dispenza meditations every single day. I've committed to 6 months. Actually, my long-term goal is probably a year. I want to see if I can do it for a year. But these meditations are about 45 minutes to an hour and a half long. So it's pretty intense. It's not like you have to do that. Some of the girls do 5-minute meditations, 30 minutes. I do the ones that were really given in the program. And so that's a good thing that came out. And I've noticed already after about 2 straight weeks, and it's much longer if you're going to count the event itself that I went to and the videos that I've done before. But after 2 weeks, I really feel that I'm much more calm, much when a trigger happens. So this past week, I had some pretty bad news. My aunt died. I had a friend who lost her husband in the war in Ukraine, and this very often triggers me and makes me really stressed out and feeling bad. I feel bad, and you feel that heaviness in your body and you cry and all that. I was so much better able to handle this. The techniques that he taught were really, really powerful, really good. I highly recommend. I mean, I wish he was a sponsor of the podcast, but he's not. But okay, still go check out drjoedispenza.com, see his work. He's really famous. He knows what he's talking about. And what I'm doing from what I've learned from all this, I mean, I've been following Dr. Joe Dispenza for a long time, but I am teaching my besties in the Biohacking Menopause support group. This is a women's only support group that you're welcome to join, or I know many of you are already in there. And we have this sort of, I share the meditations and I'm trying to drip feed them all about the techniques and hold them accountable as well to get into a practice of meditation. Not that you have to do 45 minutes. You can always start small, but the idea is to make a goal, to set a date and support women through this. But the group itself, it's all about biohacking menopause. And so we learn all about menopause again in a very, very simple way. And it's a community, so we can share our experiences. And I love the interaction that happens with these women as well. When I'm not there all the time, but they answer each other's questions. They post questions as well. They share what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And then we have these live Q&As every week with me, with my guests who are on the podcast, Dr. Fiona Lovely. She's also going to be there for a live Q&A. It's not like a lecture or anything. This is really, you come with your questions and you get a second opinion from a doctor who knows her stuff, and or from expert for whatever field that they're in. And I think it's just highly, highly valuable, because if you were to try to make an appointment with these people for a consultation, it costs hundreds of dollars and we get them for free. So go and join biohacking-menopause.mn.co. I have a link to that in the show notes. I'll have a link, if I can remember that, as well, to Dr. Joe Dispenza's stuff there. And if you join before August 1st, you can win a glycan age kit. What's that? That's a biological age test kit to see how fast or how slow is your body aging, right? Because you can be 50 years old, but you have the body of a 60-year-old, or you have a body of a 30-year-old or 40-year-old. So it's really important to understand your biological age and how fast you're aging, right? So glycan age is a really cool kit. I like it. It's so affordable, and it's quite easy to understand. And I'll have a link to the glycan age episode that I did where I spoke with Dr. No, she's not a doctor. It's just Nicolina Lauk, who explains what glycans are and why this is a biological age marker to test your age. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And let's just like get back to Dr. Fiona. Okay. Let me reel me in. Okay. Sorry about that. What did we cover in this episode with Dr. Fiona? Well, we talked about what happens to the brain with and without the hormones, what women feel during perimenopause that may be related to the brain, what is the impact of estrogen on memory, cognition, and comprehension. Does progesterone or progestin, she explains what those two are. They help the brain. Do they hurt the brain? Can you reverse dementia? How to become a superager. That was a really fun bit of this episode. And what can and what cannot hormone therapy do for the brain and brain health. And then she gives us some really cool practical tips on how to prevent dementia, if that's a concern. If you have a family member who's got Alzheimer's and you're worried about it, there's so many things that we can do. And she shares what the latest research is showing about women's brain health and the one menopause symptom that you never heard about and you need to know. I'm not going to tell you because you got to go listen to it because it's amazing. She's really cool. So who is Dr. Fiona Lovely? Anyways, she is a women's health expert with specialties in functional medicine, functional neurology, and restorative endocrinology. What does that mean? That means she's a doctor, but takes a holistic approach to healing. She wants to find the root cause of what a woman's issues are. And she reaches out into all the aspects of health, and she makes space for wellness. On top of that, she really considers the brain and mental health as well as how hormones are affecting your body and affecting the way it heals or it creates disease. And she's also the creator and the host of the popular and probably like the longest running podcast on menopause. It's called Not Your Mother's Menopause. I love that. Such a great title. And she's got more than 1 million people around the world who've downloaded the podcast, listening and tuning in and learning about the physical, mental, and spiritual journey of menopause. Yes, there is a spiritual journey here. And Dr. Lovely, she is the creator of the Menopause Doula coaching program and the founder of the Menopause Doula Society, which she's going to explain at the end of the show. And I got to get myself in there. Love to see what she's sharing, what she's doing, making a mental note of that. And if you can't wait for all this information, just go to her website, dr for doctor, lovely.com. So easy to remember. So her mission really is just to share information, to empower women and pull back the curtain to reveal the goodness that is possible in midlife. Yes, there is goodness. It can be amazing. This should be really the best time of your life. And believe me, it can be, right? And she's got a vision of the time where the world is a kinder and gentler place and the taboos of menopause no longer exist. We're definitely hitting and going in that direction. So now let's get started with the show. All right, great. Well, it's such a pleasure to have Dr. Fiona Lovely on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Zara. I appreciate that you've asked me. I can't wait to hear what we're going to get into today.
Oh, thank you. I love your name, Lovely. I know you probably hear this all the time, but it's like, what a lovely name to have. Lovely, like a lovely last name. Like, just
Thank
so
you.
lucky.
Thank you. Yes, I was born with the name Lovely, and my dad taught me early on. He said, "You can't well be an asshole if you've got a name like Lovely," and it's really good life advice, actually.
Totally. There was an episode I was just listening to of yours on the This Is Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. And what was her last name was really funny too. Like pleasure, like lovely and
Oh,
pleasure.
Savory.
Savory.
Daniel Savory. Yes,
Savory and lovely. Like
I
just what
know.
a great combo.
We need to start a podcast or a restaurant, one or the other.
Absolutely. Well, I love your podcast. I think it's awesome. And you've been around for a long time. And I just, in eating up everything that you put out there. And I'm really impressed with your deep dives into brain health, which is we're going to talk about that for women in menopause. And you just share a lot of valuable information and all the things that we can do to protect our brains. And I would love for you to start off with sharing what you remember that advertisement, and like, I don't know when it was, the 80s, and it was like, this is your brain on drugs, and that was like a
Yes.
fried egg, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so let's talk about your brains on menopause. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's a big discussion, right? So and one we're just really getting into now, thanks to some very specific research that's being done, of course, by women for women. And it's really that research is sort of zoning in on the brain's estrogen network in particular, and fascinating stuff coming out of there. So women's brains are hardwired with estrogen in mind, and it when the ovaries start to signal the brain somewhere in the 30s, if you will, that things maybe aren't as consistent with the estrogen. We'll talk about progesterone here in a minute, but they're not as consistent with the estrogen. What happens is the brain starts to go up estrogen, down estrogen, up estrogen, down estrogen, and we start to fluctuate. And that starts for women, for a lot of us, in our late 30s. So long before we're thinking this is menopause or perimenopause. And certainly it's true for my generation, is that we were taught that menopause happens when you stop having your period. That's literally all we were taught about it. We were taught nothing else about it. But it turns out that menopause itself is a complex neuroendocrine transition lasting 20 years for some women. It's a really, really long time, and it impacts the major structures of the brain, and it impacts connectivity, and it impacts fuel systems. It impacts volume of the brain itself. You know, it's interesting. I have a personal interest in Alzheimer's and dementia, as I have had family members with both. And when I look at these things, I find it so interesting. We know a lot more about Alzheimer's than we do about women's brains. Fascinating, because by far, most Alzheimer's patients are women. And the same parts of the brain that are impacted by estrogen are the same parts of the brain that decline in Alzheimer's disease. Isn't that
Wow,
fascinating?
that's crazy. Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's now that we're looking at it, we go, well, of course, this is what's happening. So we do know, for example, that women that take hormone replacement therapy have about a 40% decrease in Alzheimer's
Wow.
incidence, which is fascinating. That's reason enough for me to pay attention to something like hormone replacement therapy.
Is this, sorry
So
to interrupt you, but
please.
is this research like that will show this effect done on bioidentical hormones or the synthetic stuff, or did you take a look at that? Because they're
My,
quite the difference, but I don't know.
it is. So bioidenticals tip when we're talking about estradiol, that is actually a bioidentical hormone. We use equine estrogen is what's used. Although it is much stronger than human estradiol, that is indeed what's used. And as far as progesterone, well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of research on progesterone yet. We do know that it's an important part of, the menopause transition and looking at the cognitive impacts of it. We know that it works specifically on the GABA receptors, which is the calming neurotransmitter. So unfortunately, we don't have a lot. We've got more research on progestin, which is synthetic progesterone, and that tends to be the one that causes the trouble, whether we're talking about breast cancer or reproductive cancers, or we're talking about some of the other things that we have typically associated hormone replacement therapy with in terms of risk. It tends to be the synthetic progesterone. That's the problem.
Mhm. I'm wondering then, so when I was doing my master's of gerontology, I did a research paper on sleep, women going through menopause, the lack of sleep in the women going through menopause. And I'm wondering then sometimes if the protective benefits of estrogen on the brain and showing these types of results is maybe not a direct effect, but perhaps a secondary effect. If you're sleeping better, because what the research was showing, yeah, you got worse sleep, then yeah, you have increased risk of a lot of diseases in general. So, perhaps it's maybe not so directly related, or both, or perhaps it is both, because we do have the estrogen receptors on the brain, but at the same time, we can't dismiss the fact that if you're sleeping better because you're not having night sweats and you're suddenly feeling calmer because of the progesterone,
Mhm.
well then, well, duh, yeah, you may have better chance of lowering your risk of Alzheimer's or dementia or any other kind of diseases, right?
Yes, absolutely. Sleep, we know the quality of sleep is absolutely connected to whether or not we have an increased risk for essentially all of the chronic diseases, for sure. It's a really important one. And of course, we know about the glymphatic system, which is essentially the brain's dishwasher. It kicks in overnight after a period of sleep, and we need that longer sleep in order to have the brain clean up its own brain, its own tissue. So it's again, it's the brain's dishwasher. I love that. I heard that somebody say that years ago, and I think that's the best way to describe it. So that's
Yeah.
ultimately what we're looking at. And those things, we're cleaning up the amyloid plaques when the lymphatic system is doing its thing. We're cleaning up the cellular debris. Really, really important. Sleep is critical.
The first time I heard about the glymphatic system, which is not lymphatic, maybe some of the listeners here have heard of lymphatic, and that's your sort of detoxification system, but
Mhm.
that doesn't go up to the brain because the brain has its own detoxification system called the glymphatic system. And I think I first heard it from Dr. Sarah Gottfried, and she called
Mhm.
it a brain shampoo.
I love that.
And
I love her
basically,
too.
yeah, what happens is mostly it happens when you're asleep and the spaces in the brain just sort of open up, right? And then you have this cerebral spinal fluid come and up into the brain and sweep out all of this debris that you're talking about and the beta amyloid plaque. And so
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
with my paper, at least I found out, I mean, it just seemed to be okay, more research needs to be done, but we're making these theories that perhaps because Alzheimer's patients have higher beta amyloid plaque buildup,
Mhm.
perhaps there is a connection between poor sleep and dementia. But just at the time when I wrote my paper, there wasn't really any conclusions yet. But it is
Mhm.
very, very interesting, and it's something to put sleep on a pedestal and get your
Mhm.
sleep hygiene, and don't dismiss it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. And isn't it interesting that it tends to be women that have sleep issues? And isn't it
Yeah.
interesting that it tends to be women that have that sleep issue at midlife? And this is ultimately when we know the genetic expression of the ApoE3 and 4 genes, 4 specifically connected to our risk of Alzheimer's. Isn't it interesting that we talk about the menopause switch, which is at midlife, the hormonal egress. Of course, it goes up and down, like I talked about, and at the same time, progesterone's just slowly declining. And then at some point, estrogen doesn't go up and down anymore; it just declines. And when the estrogen leaves the building, that's ultimately when those switches happen. And I think it is really important for us to know about that because there is a timing for when we can start to look at lifestyle for sure. First of all, you can look at lifestyle factors anytime. It's going to improve your life no matter what. The things that are good for the brain are the things that are good for everything else that you've heard about 1,000 times. And specifically, the brain and the heart have very similar requirements. And so, if you're doing lifestyle management that is heart healthy, it will also be brain healthy. And looking at that, but also knowing your ApoE status, I think is really helpful as well when we're looking at risk of Alzheimer's specifically.
Yeah, I've got one allele of the ApoE4 gene, and I none of my no history of dementia or Alzheimer's in my family, unless I forgot, didn't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it happened and don't remember. I don't know, but it's a concern for me because I thought, oh wow, I guess I'm more at risk than everybody
Yeah,
else, so I better
yeah.
take care of my brain, and that's really important. Then, and there are many other things that are factors and risk factors for dementia and Alzheimer's too. So and just because I have this predisposition doesn't mean it's going to happen, but maybe I need to work a little bit harder than everybody else, right?
And that's why I think it's so powerful to get those the testing results. I know I avoided it for years because I thought, I don't really want to know. I don't want to know. And then a functional medicine doctor who's a friend of mine said, but Fiona, when you know, it gives you so much better motivation to stick with what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So, and she's very inspired. She's inspired me in a lot of ways there because she has the double four. And so she has a much increased risk.
Mm.
Both her parents had Alzheimer's and she has both. And she just is so meticulous with how she does self-care. And it's really inspiring to watch. And she has told me, my motivation is that I don't want my kids to go through what I went through.
Yeah.
So for her, she's busy, but she prioritizes things like getting together with friends because she knows it's so good for brain health, for adrenal health, for spiritual health, for all over the
Mhm.
place. So I think it can be fuel in the right way if we look at it properly that way.
Yeah, I always say that to protect our brains, it's not about doing crossword puzzles and Sudokus. You got to do the heavy lifting. That's why I go get a master's degree, then I go learn another language.
Yes.
I'll pick up the
Yes.
clarinet one day. Like I gotta learn like all this stuff because I think that's really the heavy lifting. And if you want to be a
Yes.
super ager, right? Or if you want to
Yeah.
be able to, I mean, I got to do the heavy lifting. Maybe other people don't
Super.
because they don't have the genes, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell me about okay, I recently heard Dr. Vonda Wright use the term pro-ageism. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, oh yeah, I love that. Now we're getting there. Now you just said a super ager. Can you tell me what that is, please?
I super ager is I like that word better than pro ager and pro ages because when I was doing my master's, I was studying with Dr. Walter Longo, and of course you're looking at all these pro aging pathways, and I'm like, ooh, that's a bad thing. We want the anti aging pathways. We don't want the pro. So for me, it's like it's still kind of hard to process. Pro aging to me is a negative pathway, but I prefer the word super ager, and super agers are those older adults who are smashing it. I mean, they've got the brain health and they've got the physical health. And so they're not, they're doing a little bit of extra work. And in terms of they're doing the heavy lifting. And that's if you want to become, we all know those 80-year-olds who are just sharp as a tack.
Mhm.
Right. And
Mhm.
or they're still running outdoors and doing some exercises, and those are super agers. Those are the ones that still get uncomfortable. And it's getting out of your comfort zone that helps us build resilience and get stronger because how did they get there? I mean, it's like not like life didn't throw them lemons, right? Like when you get to 80, you've seen a lot of stuff happen. So you got to be pretty resilient to even get there. So that's at least through my research and my experience, this is what we've been finding in gerontology is that you got to get a little bit heavy, lift heavier to be a super ager, not just
I love
a normal
this.
ager.
I love this, what you're saying, and I think about in my patient base, those 80 plus year olds that are super sharp, that move super fast, that are never late for their appointments. And most of the time, what I love about them is that um, they want to have deep and meaningful conversation. They want to talk about what books I'm reading, not what's going on social media.
Yeah.
Who cares? They don't care about that at all. They want to know what cool new workout I just tried. They want to tell
Oh,
me about what they're up to. And what I find really interesting is when I look at the women in my patient base that are still in their 80 plus doing really well, they're the ones that ignored the recommendation of the Women's Health Initiative to stop taking their hormones.
interesting. So you're
Isn't
seeing
that
this in your
fascinating?
clinical practice
Yes, I
yourself.
am. They are strong, literally, mentally, and physically. Fascinating because their brains were never deprived
Yeah.
of estrogen. And I think that's a really important thing to look at when we're talking about the cognitive impacts of menopause is to say, ultimately, if we can get treatment, if a woman wants to use hormones, okay, she can choose whether she does or not. For the interest of brain health, it absolutely makes sense to really take a good look. Heart health as well, bone health, heart, bone, and brain. If you got any of those things in your family history, you're concerned about them for yourself, you must seriously look at bringing or considering HRT or hormone replacement therapy. We can do it safely now. We know what went wrong. We know what we should be paying attention to. And frankly, it's women have come in and said, to hell with this. You guys haven't figured this out for us. We're going to figure it out ourselves. And
Yeah.
so it's these wonderful female researchers. But anyways, to go back to estrogen, we want to start the estrogen therapy, potentially progesterone too, before we stop cycling. That's when we get the best benefit, because then our brain and our heart and our bones never register that drop in estrogen for any length of time. And we know that when a woman is low estrogen, or estrogen is leaving the building, again, she has less cerebral blood flow. She has less processing power. She has less neuroplasticity and connectivity within her neurons. By the way, I wanted to say, you talked about the lymphatic system. It was named for the glial cells based on the lymphatic system. So that's why those two were brought together and called the lymphatic system. Isn't that fascinating?
That's cool. I didn't know that
Yeah,
little
yeah.
fun
And the
fact.
glial cells are the most abundant cells in the brain. They're not the neurons. It's the
Mhm.
support cells that are the most abundant cells in the brain. So you also said something really interesting about the super aging. When we invite novelty, the brain loves it. That's what lights up neuroplasticity in the brain, is when we're doing stuff we haven't done before, when we're trying new things.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can say, as I'm in the thick of perimenopause, there's a lot of days where I just literally want my cats, my blanket, my tablet so I can read my, fiction, whatever I'm reading, I don't want to read the technical books. I literally just want to get cozy and tell the world to get lost, right? And I fight that a lot of times, because I'm like, no, 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 no. You need to keep moving. You need to keep being with the people. And I think it's really an interesting conversation to talk about. Speaking of Sarah Gottfried, she used the word connectome. I heard her used once, where she was talking about the communities we have, the connections we have. And one of the most compelling bits of research I've seen on the cognitive impacts of menopause talks about something called anhedonia, which is the medical terminology for lack of joy, lack of pleasure, inability to reach pleasure. Now, if we had had this conversation 10 years ago, we would have connected that to sex alone. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a woman's ability, once she reaches a certain part of perimenopause or early menopause years, she reaches a place where, for a lot of us, we do not have the same connections anymore to the things we may have loved for a long time. And yes, that can mean a spouse or a dear long friend or a job we have adored for decades. All of a sudden, or a hobby that we've loved or something, all of a sudden that connection, that sort of joy of that connection is not there. Now, this is connected to the egress of estrogen, progesterone as well. If a woman tends to be more anxious, that's connected to progesterone deficiency, and she can easily have a treatment for that, progesterone HRT. But this whole idea of how we lose our ability to connect is very, very fascinating to me. And I have felt that myself in the last probably 18 months and thought, wow, now I get why women between the ages of 40 and 60 have a 60% increase of suicide. We are literally misunderstood. So the treatment of this that I've just talked about, the anhedonia, the inability to connect, the inability to find joy, is not an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. It is, first of all, look at the lifestyle pieces. Are you actually taking care of yourself well? If you're eating like shit, sleeping like shit, chances are you're going to feel like shit. This is how it works. But if you've done all the things and you still can't get there, please talk to someone about hormone replacement therapy so that you can, again, remember our brains are estrogen hardwired. 120 years ago, we were only expected to live to the age of 50. So we have made this gigantic leap in lifespan. but we're working on the health span now. And it is my opinion, after many years of saying women can do this without having to use an intervention like hormone replacement therapy. It is my professional opinion now that I've seen the studies. I look at them every day. I'm looking at research every day. It's such a fascinating time to be in women's health because there's so much great information coming about women's health at midlife and beyond. So much great research, literally on the daily. It's coming. It's so good after so many years of it just being, shouting into the void, right? So ask your provider if you are a candidate for HRT. Be informed about it. There's so many great resources. When I started the show, the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast in 2016, there was nobody else menopause podcasting. I was the only one. So
You're a pioneer. Oh my goodness.
I
You
I
are.
didn't, it was just bizarre to think about it because of course I had no context at all. I just
Yeah.
thought I was dispensing information to my patients. I thought that's who would listen. I thought it would be people that knew me. I thought it would be my parents, maybe. So on the first few episodes, I'm like, got to be careful not to be too sweary.
Your
Yeah, I
mom and dad
clearly
are
got over
listening.
that.
Super interesting. And so, yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're seeing, the research, more and more research coming out, which is really, it's about time. And I want to get back to the cognitive functions that you explain a lot of what's sort of happening, but let's talk in just layman's terms. And what is a woman feeling as she's going through menopause in terms of what's happening in her brain? We talk about brain fog, we talk about
Mhm.
anxiety, and what other clues you think she'll have to see that her brain is really deprived of the estrogen?
Yeah, so the brain fog is the big one. And I know I have experienced this myself. I've had patients talk to me about it for years, but it's like this, I don't know, you just can't, it's like this cloud that you walk around with. And, the information's there, but it's not the same. And it may be a memory thing. Yesterday, I left the house. I got out to the garage to get into my car. I was going out for a business meeting, and I had one slipper on and one outside shoe on.
Time to increase the estrogen
I,
dosage.
I know, right? Well, and I'm right on the cusp of when I'm like, I haven't started using estrogen yet.
Oh,
I've been
okay.
using progesterone. So, but believe me, my provider and I have an appointment next month. There is a conversation coming. But
Interesting. Yes.
for sure. I mean, someone's in my clinic saying that to me, I would say chances are you probably haven't optimized the estrogen yet. So let's do blood work and take a look and see where things are at. So we experience a loss of energy. And that's not just the physical energy, but it's the mental energy. We have difficulties with focus, with concentration. These are the things that can happen. We lose emotional regulation. We get stuck in these sort of emotional loops. What I found really interesting for myself is some of the self-deprecating thoughts that I had when I was a much younger female have all of a sudden come back. I'm like, okay, I have not seen you for 30 years, and frankly, that's okay. You need to go away again.
You're not welcome back.
No, not at all. Absolutely not. So we do have forgetfulness, of course. We do have troubles with concentration. It's interesting. I have a friend, Andrea Donsky. Do you know her?
She sounds really familiar. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so she's kind of the TikTok podcast, the TikTok menopause lady.
Hmm.
She has a podcast as well, and she has research. She does research. Her website is wearemorphous.com,
Oh,
and you can
yes,
go.
that's why I know
Yeah,
her. Yeah.
yes, and you can go and fill out these. She's gathering data sets on what women in perimenopause are actually going through. And actually, I'm going to bring up the graphic she sent me recently. I was doing a talk on this very thing, and when she interviewed me for her show about a year ago, and when we were talking, and she listed off the 10 top symptoms that her people, the data she's gathered that women have at perimenopause, the 10 top symptoms, like 8 out of them are brain based.
Interesting.
Isn't that
Yeah.
fascinating?
Well,
Yeah.
considering hormones are very much controlled by the brain, I mean,
Oh,
it makes
oh,
perfect sense that it starts in the brain,
oh,
right?
yes, absolutely. And the estrogen works on the dopamine, it works on serotonin, it works on norepinephrine, it works on other neurotransmitters that are responsible for us feeling well.
Yeah.
So,
Interest, yeah. I
mm,
think it's so important. I think a lot of women, I do these reels, women around the world, I interview them and just in 1 minute try to get their story. And several of them had
I
said
love
now
them.
that
They're
they're,
great, by the way. They're
oh,
great.
thank you. They're
Yeah.
very popular, but the ones who are sort of past menopause, have sort of now in a different zone, they look back and they say, yeah, I didn't realize that my depression was menopause related. I didn't
Yes.
realize that the brain function was menopause related. We always think of hot flashes. You got hot flashes, you're in menopause. You don't, you're not in
Mhm.
menopause. That's kind of it, or night
Yep.
sweats. That's
Yep.
all. And Andrea Donsky, she has a
Mhm.
list of over 100 symptoms of
Yes.
menopause, perimenopause. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we may not relate. Not that everything's related. I mean, it could be your thyroid function. It could be, some other event in your life that's going on. It's just, I always feel like menopause is this, it's kind of like when you're in the middle of the night, you wake up and you hear a noise and suddenly you get scared and everything's exaggerated, or if you have a pain, the pain is exaggerated. And then the sun comes up and you're like, oh, actually, it's not that scary anymore. It's not
Yeah.
that bad. And I feel like menopause is that. It's everything's just exacerbated when you
Absolutely.
don't have these hormones, where you'd be able to handle a lot of these things that life throws at us much better.
You know, the reason for that is because part of that estrogen brain network is the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, which includes the limbic system along with the frontal lobes. These are our emotional regulation systems, and they are our safety mechanism systems as well. And so if we lose the fuel for these systems, they start to malfunction isn't the right word, but we get caught in loops, right? We just can't seem to get out of certain loops. By the way, women between the ages of 30 and 60 are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression as women outside of those age groups. Don't tell me
Mm.
that's not hormone related. Of course it is. Of
Yeah.
course. I mean, that's not, you don't have to have a PhD to understand that, right? So, and another thing that happens is that we have, these inflammatory cascades which kick on at perimenopause. And a lot of the brain symptoms can be based on the inflammatory cascades there too. So, as brain loses its ability to use glucose, which is its primary fuel, and that's part of the estrogen egress, it goes to lipids for fuel. And so the lipids are not nearly as good a fuel. And so we have this inflammation that starts, and this is where a lot of this brain fog, et cetera, is coming from. Now, studies have shown that exercise is a really good remedy for that inflammatory response. And I was just listening to Dr. Mosconi talk on a podcast recently where she has isolated that different kinds of exercise can target different kinds of symptoms. For example, if you tend to be someone that's more anxious, depressed, what were the other things? Rage.
Moody.
That's right. She talked about rage.
Oh,
She said you
rage.
need to lift. That's the muscle building. That's the
Mm.
muscle building. But if you tend to be more, I can't sleep well, the thermoregulation things, my hot flashes and night sweats, cardio is what helps better for that. Now, isn't that so interesting?
Didn't know this.
I didn't either. It's new to
Whoa.
me too.
I usually recommend my clients just to do all of them, like get the strength, get the cardio, and get the flexibility, agility, mobility. Like though, like just your whole week should include something like that. Don't only do yoga, but unless, certain people, like maybe like the how she's talking to, yeah, maybe for a certain period of time, it's like you got to stay away from that type of exercise, and you really got to get more of another because of certain things that are happening in your life. But that is really, it's a nice
Isn't
little
that interesting? Yeah.
guide to have to help you figure out, yeah, what I need a bit more of.
And I, as I so appreciate what you've said about the agility, the mobility, the lift, the cardio. And as a woman who is deep in the pile, I don't want to hear it. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is what I'm saying. I know, because I tell patients the same thing, and then they go, well, do you do this? No, hell no. I'm lucky if I get one off a day, forget 2 or 3. So we have to remember that it's okay to just accept where you are. And if you did one squat today, or one banded clam, or, you did a walk for 10 minutes, brava, sister, you are already doing much better. So, it's that whole, we got to give the information. I know I do this too. I get so excited to give the information. I'm like, I got it for you. I got it. I can tell you all the things, I can fix it. But then it gets like a tsunami of information, and it feels like more stuff to do when we already feel overwhelmed and are literally connecting with nothing.
Yeah.
So when I have days like that and I don't want to do any of it, I literally just turn on my favorite dance music and I shake my ass around the bedroom.
That's a great idea because music lifts your mood, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
actually we studied music in gerontology, believe
Is
it or
that
not.
right?
We did because it's a very important factor for mood and depression as we're
Mm.
aging too. And I was so disappointed we didn't talk about hormones and menopause. It was like 10 minutes, not even on menopause. And it was, yeah, something I could argue with. But besides the point, we did study this, and it's particularly for Alzheimer's patients because there's music therapy that helps them as well. And so we studied it with the brain, and that was really cool to have that in our bucket of tools to get to use is music.
Mhm.
We often forget about it. When we were teenagers, we were listening to it nonstop, and now we're listening to podcasts, news, and
Yep.
let's just get some of the music in and start dancing, and also to bring that joy back into your heart. And I think it's super interesting. I never thought about it, but yeah, to have this loss of joy, to have this loss of connection, that's a
Mhm.
brain-based thing. And
Absolutely.
menopause really, I think
Mhm.
it's a good clue because sometimes you don't know, why am I feeling
Mhm.
this way? Is it, and
Yeah.
a lot of women come to me asking me too, well, I'm feeling really low, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling anxious. And I go, well, and then they go, is it the hormones? Is it because I have no hormones? I said, well, what's going on in your life? And they said, well, my I just got a divorce, or my boyfriend left the country, lost my job. And I'm like, well, dude, with or without hormones, I'd be depressed too. Like, as that's
100%.
that's
Yeah.
the way it is. It's never 100% one thing or another,
Yeah.
but certainly I always say you got to work on both, get the hormones
Mhm.
optimized, but also get your because get things in perspective, or
Mhm.
try to understand, solve the problems that are happening in your life. Because
Yep.
when we think about how interrelated they are, just topping it up with hormones may help, but really sometimes
Mhm.
just the fact or perception of stress, well, that's activating a whole cascade of hormones like cortisol and epinephrine and
Absolutely.
adrenaline, and that's triggered by a thought and an
Mhm.
emotion. And that's not the hormones. Oh, suddenly you get a surge of cortisol. Well, and then
Yep.
you start getting panicky. Usually it's the other way around. So I think they're both, I mean, hormones are just such a big can of worms too, and it's whole symphony. It's not just like one hormone. But I think, yeah, getting them both, thinking about the whole picture, I think is quite important, because sometimes I'm just as guilty as talking about hormones, and it sounds like it's the savior, and it can fix everything. But we also have to remember, well, there's the whole diet and lifestyle piece that we haven't talked about, but it's kind of goes without saying, right?
Oh, absolutely. At this point, anybody listening to your show, Zora, knows all the lifestyle things, right? Are they different for brain? Absolutely not. Like, really, just carry on and find the things that make sense for you. Maybe you're more, if we're talking about diet, maybe keto makes sense for you. For a lot of people, keto doesn't make sense. Paleo is better for some people. For some people, it's like, no, I'm good. I'm on a carnivore diet, or I want to be a vegan, or whatever. Whatever works for you is fine. That's
Mhm.
the thing. Just have looked at it and figured it out. If you think you have food allergies, don't sit on food allergies. Get them out, because they will be there's primary things that will cause difficulties with the brain. And in this case, with food allergies, because they have such a strong effect on the gut permeability, anything that's happening in the gut is happening in the brain. If the gut is leaky, the brain is leaky. And believe me, you don't want that. So, look at these things that are going to give you a big payoff. For me, it's doing my little dance exercise. On days where I feel better, I do something more organized. But there are days that I just don't, right? And it's okay to recognize that. I want to come back to the music thing you just mentioned. Music for the brain. Have you seen the Parkinson's patients with,
Yes, yes. The
isn't
YouTube
that,
videos of, yeah, how they
yes,
light up. Suddenly
isn't
they
that
light up
fascinating?
and they
Oh, it's
remember
so
the
good.
music. They remember the words.
Yes, yes, absolutely. When I would visit family members in their dementia care, there was always music playing. There was either someone was sitting at the piano, somebody had an iPad on, and there was music playing, or the TV would be on the music channels, and it was
Mhm.
always something related to that generation. So, it was Kenny Rogers or Nana Squirry and things I haven't heard in a long time. Willie Nelson,
Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton. So good.
So
But you
funny.
could see the residents light up. And one of the most fascinating things I saw was if there was a live singer that would come in and play an instrument, they would literally be riveted to her. And so
Yeah.
I think in a way the music touches a very primitive part of the brain. With Alzheimer's and dementia, we lose the executive function, we lose the frontal lobe function, but there's something really, really old that gets touched when music is playing.
Have you seen the research, or have you ever learned about when in gerontology we studied the music effect on the brain? So I don't remember the exact parts of the brain, but it was, if you think about a song in your head, it lights up, I don't know, two parts of your brain. If you actually sing the song, then it lights up maybe four parts of your brain. And then if you were to play the song and sing the song on a piano or something, then it just like the whole brain lights up. So all these things, it was interesting how to see that even just thinking a song actually lights up certain parts of the brain. But if you can sing it out loud and dance to it or play it on a piano, then that's just again more plasticity for the brain and helping to make those neural connections.
Absolutely. And the thing that causes the greatest reduction in risk for Alzheimer's and dementia is partner dancing.
I love it. I love it.
Isn't that so
I'm a
good?
dancer.
I know,
It's
me too.
and I used to, whenever I'd go to my dance classes, I always post on Instagram like, this is really good for your brain.
It is. It's super good. It might
Yeah.
be one of the best. Yep.
Yeah, I
So
love
interesting.
that research because, and it makes perfect sense because you're moving your body, okay, getting physical
Hmm.
activity. You have to remember the choreography. So your brain has to,
Hmm.
function on the right, left, etc. And then you have the social aspect. We know that social connections are very important for long life and healthy life. So you're getting there, having a good time, feeling the joy, feeling connected, just all of that together. I mean, I don't know, you don't get that when you're playing tennis, or I don't know. It's not quite the same. Or
Well,
golf.
and you're physically touching somebody you care for,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the oxytocin. Of course.
Yes, yes, and all of the goodies. You get all the groceries when you do the you do the partner dancing.
So let's talk about then, okay, if we're feeling any of these things, the brain fog, the memory loss, the cognitive function, we can't seem to put things
Mhm.
together anymore, and we feel like, oh my gosh, I think I'm losing my mind. What can we do about it? What can we do to protect our brains or even reverse any damage that's been done already?
So you can step into these lifestyle things at any point. It doesn't matter if you've already had the diagnosis or not. So I just want to say that. And if you're a woman who is still in the transition of menopause, the research is showing us that within 4 years of the last menstrual period, the brain is now post renovation. And we have stable fuel processes, we have stable blood flow, the volume of our brain stabilizes, we get the goodies back. Okay,
Mm,
so
cool. That's good
I know
news.
it is, isn't it? I can't wait.
Stabilizes. Yeah. The brain even
Yes,
stabilizes. That's cool.
the
But that,
brain
I guess it makes
stabilizes.
sense with the hormones, right? If
Yep,
hormones
yep.
stabilize, even though they're low, if you're not on therapy, then yeah, at least it's
And
not
that's,
fluctuating.
yep, that's right. And that's, but what's fascinating to me about that is obviously, even though I don't know how long a generation is. Do you happen to know that? 120 years ago, we only lived till 50. So
Hmm.
however many generations that is.
Hmm.
Now we've had this huge leap in length of lifespan, working on health span. And obviously our brain is evolving, but it takes time. So we've got these long lifespans. Physical evolution takes time. And so this is where I think we can, if you pardon the biohacking expression, we can really hack our brains by looking at what our hormone situation is, and would we do well to be propped up with certain things, and this can be supplements as well as HRT itself. So certainly looking at the hormonal picture and saying, are there things here I can do? Now, the research shows that the before the age of 60 is better for hormone therapy. So if you're thinking about it, the sooner the better. Best if done before you stop bleeding or within 10 years of your last menstrual period or by the age of 60. Now, there are some that believe that that research is outdated and that we will see more contemporary research coming that shows that really we can introduce them at any time and it's just fine.
Yeah.
So, because I do believe, I cannot come up with in my brain right now, the actual study that said estrogen after the age of 60 tends to go the opposite direction and cause more troubles for women, but it may have been born of that same era that created the Women's Health Initiative.
What I learned from Dr. David Rosensweet, because I did the Institute of Bioidentical Medicine, their menopause method program, and the way he
Amazing.
explained it is that what happens if if your body has not seen hormones for 10 years, you are also having more plaque buildup in the arteries. You're also having a lot of degeneration just kind of happening. So that if you have, so that's why the Women's Health Initiative was when they used older women, the average age was 62. Well, these women were
Yep.
already like
Yep.
way past menopause or
Menopause. Yep.
perimenopause. So in fact, if you suddenly introduce these hormones and you get this blood flow and you get all this, regeneration, a little chip of that plaque may fall off because you're just rejuvenating everything. And that's what can cause the stroke or the blood clot or something. So
Okay.
it's not that these women cannot do it. You just have to be very careful introducing it to a woman who's 10 years postmenopause. And there's a method and a way, and a doctor, trained in menopause medicine should know how to do this. And
Yep.
then 6 months, if you've gone 6 months in the clear, then you're okay. And then they feel more comfortable up increasing your dosage. And they're just, everybody's a bit more relaxed after that 6 month mark. That's what we learned. Now, again, everyone has to make their own decision and talk to their own doctor about their own health risks, because you got to come in with all your blood work and your cholesterol
Mm-hmm.
levels and your
Mm-hmm.
cardiac, grams, your family history and all that. And then the doctor will assess, okay, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do, low and slow, and then just
Mm-hmm.
build up. I
I
think
love
that's
that. I
the
just learned a ton. Thank you for sharing. And it made me think of something my own prescriber said to me. I asked her about a patient of mine who is a woman in her 60s, late 60s, with mild cognitive impairment, which is sort of the precursor to dementia and Alzheimer's. And she wondered if it was too late to start. When I asked her, she said, depends on her cardiovascular history.
yeah.
So I suppose that's exactly what you've just said. It depends if she's got elevated lipid profile, which, by the way, we can have transiently in perimenopause, and we can also have if the thyroid is not in balance.
Are you a
So,
smoker? I mean, there's
oh
so many
yeah.
factors that come in that a doctor needs to ask a woman, any woman, before she gets on hormone therapy. It's not like, oh, here you go, try this, standard
Mm-hmm.
dose. There's a lot of questions that go on. I should probably do a podcast and all that, It was like
Yes.
10 or 20 questions that Dr. Rosenzweig gave us. I was like, "Ooh, interesting." Yeah. Even,
Yeah,
when
that's
you had your children, how many children you had, a lot of cool stuff. So there's the hormone therapy piece. I think that's a
yep.
really big one. And again, this is for every woman to go and talk to their own doctor about that for the risks versus benefits and get on the right treatment. What else can we do to
Yeah.
protect our brains?
I think it is really, really, really important to look at your food. It's probably the best medicine we have between food and movement. Those are the levers, if you will, that give you the best payoff. And I'm going to use an example of a patient who, quite a few years ago now, was showing the signs of early. He was well within the age where it wouldn't be considered early onset, but he was showing dementia signs. And he had been sent to the neurologist. The neurologist said, yes, indeed, we are talking about dementia. Get your affairs in order, basically. I mean, how awful, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's get to this and help brains before they get to that point, right? And so his daughter was a patient of mine, and they came in together, and she said, what can he do? And I said, well, there's some really good and very old research, like 100 years old, that shows that neurodegeneration can be reversed with, in this case, a keto diet. I'm not endorsing a keto diet. It is works well for some. I find, generally speaking, it works better for men. If women want to do it, we just need to take the greens factor way up. But then it ends up being like 10 cups of greens every day, and not many of us have the interest in spending that much time chewing in a day. I'm too
Cook
busy
it,
to
make
chew
cook
that much.
spinach. Cook spinach.
Oh,
It goes from this to this,
yeah.
like really
Oh,
big.
that's a good way to do it.
I just
That's a
did
good way to do
cooked
it.
spinach and I'm like, oh, I got 10 cups of
And
greens
then
in
you got 10
there.
cups.
And it's
I
like,
love that.
half a cup.
I love that. That's such a hot tip. Such a hot tip. Anyways, within 3 months, his symptoms were completely reversed.
Wow.
Okay. This is old research, and do not expect that your neurologist has heard this. They might not have. So again, in this case, it was a man. Men respond better to keto, etc. But a woman could do something similar with a diet that would work well for her. And if she was already at the place of being diagnosed, she could try a keto diet using the greens method that we just talked about. And it would be tremendously helpful. Dr. Dale Bredesen, who is reversing Alzheimer's guy, among other things.
He's a brilliant neurologist and researcher. I think he's in his
Yeah,
70s.
yeah.
You probably interviewed him, I'm sure. No?
No, I haven't, but I've
Oh,
studied with him, right?
oh yeah,
I'm
that's
in
right. You did
his,
his course. Yeah. But you
yes,
got
I'm
to
in his
interview him. He's
certification.
a fabulous interviewer. One of my favorite guests of all
He's so
time. Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and
Yes.
he's such an interesting guy, but he says that between the keto flex diet, which is what he uses in his system, and the intermittent fasting, the window, those are like the two most powerful things we can talk about. There's different kinds of Alzheimer's, and that's a much bigger conversation. Please go listen to Zora's interview with Dr. Bredesen. But yeah, because he is such a fascinating guy. But that may be something you can try yourself. You don't have to get anybody else involved in that. You can learn on YouTube how to do a keto or how to do a paleo diet. I prefer paleo for women. But again, that's me. Others would say it's all horse shit. You should be vegan, like whatever makes you happy. Okay. I'm not
Just get the
here.
processed food out of your life and you're like
Oh yeah.
80% there.
And
Like,
make sure you're not doing sugars all the time. I mean, I know that's when I'm in a spiral, when I'm like, oh, I want the sugary things. And I'm like, oh, okay, what do I need to do to get my brain better in this moment? Okay, so rest is incredibly important. Sleep hygiene, the sleep things. We started this conversation by talking about that. I think relationships are really, really important to look at. If you have I mean, here's the thing that happens to us women in particular midlife. I think dudes are the same. But we sort of lose the ability to tolerate crap, right?
yep.
And so I think that's why a lot of marriages break down at midlife, is because the things that make us pleasing to other people, aka biological, the hormones, when they go away, we're like, oh hell no, I'm not doing this one more minute. Now, whether that's one partner or the other saying that,
Yeah.
But that's part of what happens. So, looking at those really, or maybe you've got a crappy boss that's been stressing you out for 10 years, like enough, like just no more of that. We just lose the tolerance of that. Excuse me. And I think it's important to look at that. I think I covered, movement, of course, as you talked about, flexibility, number one, mobility, number two, those two things, when we get fragile, when we get frail, the chances of, that increases our morbidity and mortality really fast. And so, and for a lot of women, it's interesting to look at women's health versus men's health at midlife. Women do better overall. We're healthier overall than men are until we reach menopause. And then our risk factors go way up. Why is that? Right. And we've got a lot of researchers looking at that and saying, let's get those tidbits so we can essentially, biohack ourselves and make sure that doesn't happen for us. But you need to look at the things. If you have osteoporosis in the family, you have to be doing weight-bearing exercise every day. Absolutely. And please have somebody look at your estrogen levels, because estrogen is required for building bone. So if sleep is an issue for you, you should be looking at having someone look at your progesterone. By the way, I don't think I talked about that enough earlier, and I just want to say it again. Let's go back to mobility. Think about movement. I like to think about movement in terms of, what do I want to be doing 10 years from now? Do I still want to be able to carry my groceries in, or lift the grandkids, or mow the lawn, or do my own gardening, or all of those things? If the answer is all of those things, then I best be training with that in mind.
I'd rather
And so I
hire
think that,
somebody and then just go to the gym. Sorry. I'll
no,
hire
right?
somebody to I just get the money,
That's
get
awesome.
someone else to do it, and then I'll go lift the grandkids. Okay, I can do that. I want to do that, but I want to go climb Kilimanjaro. I don't want to be mowing a lawn.
Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly.
It's just,
Well, listen,
but it's
sometimes it's a
true. That's
time
just
or
me.
money thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Time or money. Throw a little money at something and then you have your own time to do it the way you want to do it. It's fine. But I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And I know Peter Attia talks about this, like does he call it the Senior Olympics? No,
Yes, he calls it the Senior Olympic. No, the 100-year-old
is
Olympics
it
or
the
something
100-year-old
like that.
Olympics
Yeah,
or decathlon? The 100-year-old decathlon. How are you
yeah.
going to train for that?
Yes. And
And
he's like figured out, like he really calculated in the
yeah,
numbers, like backwards, what he needs to be doing today in order to be able to lift a grandchild, because you got to do a squat a certain way, a certain number of times. And to be able to be,
yeah,
that's just fascinating how he figured that out. But I agree with him 100% and with you 100%. I think it's,
yeah,
we can't imagine ourselves as an 80-year-old or a 70-year-old when you're in your 50s. You have no idea. It's
no,
really, really hard. But if we're lucky, we'll get there. And we'll get there. The only way we'll get there and be able to lift things and go upstairs
mhm,
and be independent, because most
yeah.
older adults, they want to remain independent, then you don't wait until you're 70 and start training. You got to do it now, right?
Although if you're 70 and you decide it's time, you will still get benefit.
Yeah.
But
Look at
don't
Train with
follow a
Joan.
25-year, oh yeah, exactly. You don't follow a 25-year-old on YouTube and think you're going to do that. Chances are you're going to injure yourself. You're going to end up in my office. But I think Dr. Attia is a mathematician. That was his original degree, if I remember correctly. So of course he figured out the statistics of it. Of course he did. Which, thank God, because I don't want to be the one to figure it out. So I'm just following his formula, going,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to apply that to myself. But make sure you are building muscle. We know muscle is the organ of longevity. So do that however that looks for you. It may be resistance training, body weight training, or it may be that you've got someone that can show you, or you have the skills to actually do the heavy lifting in the gym with the plates and the whole thing. I'm not there yet, but I aspire to be someday. So
When I interviewed Dr. Dale Bredesen and you did his program,
yeah,
do you remember when he talked about Katsu bands? 'Cause I'm a fan of these
yeah,
blood flow restriction bands. And I was
yeah.
so surprised. He says, yeah, this is a good thing we need to introduce into our bodies if we want better brain health, because we get more blood flow, or increasing our muscle mass. And there were so many reasons why, but do you remember him talking a bit about that?
I remember Peter Attia talking about it, and some of our physiotherapists here in the office like them as well. But I know next to nothing about them except for what you've basically just said, which is that it's the blood flow. It's a control for the blood flow. So I
And
find it fascinating. Anything
growth
that gives
hormone.
us a, oh,
It
is
increases
it?
growth hormone. Yeah, I've been relying on these bands since
Wow.
haven't been able to move very much because I'm trying to reverse osteoarthritis. And the only way I've been
Mm.
maintaining my muscle mass is through these bands. And it's just unbelievable. I'm shocked myself. It's been a year and a half now. And I'm thinking this is, and I talked about blood flow restriction already years ago with other people discussing how it works, because I was thinking, as an older adult, I am not going to ask my 85-year-old father-in-law to lift heavy things. He's not going to do it, but he can wear these bands, and that's increasing the muscle growth. And they have studies, at least with the Katsu bands. I mean, there's tons of research on blood flow restriction, but the Katsu bands, they've increased muscle mass in a 104-year-old woman. Is that insane? So I think if people who
Wow.
are injured, you just had surgery, you're recovering, or you just, you know what, you don't want to lift heavy weights. Like
Yeah.
then there's an alternative. And I don't know why more people are not talking about this, because
Oh,
they work for
this
muscle
is
mass for sure, but
for muscle
evidently for the brain. So I thought that was really interesting. Dale
brain
Bredesen
health.
talked about that.
Yeah, I must not have gotten to that module yet.
Oh, go look
I'm
at
working
it.
my way through it. It's
Next time I
dense,
see
let's
you, you're going
just
to be
say.
wearing those bands.
Oh, I love that. So that just brings up another little brain hack that I just thought of, and it's completely left my mind because, of course, this is how my perimenopausal brain is working today.
No, it's because you got to get to work and I got to wrap this up. And I think we're going to
Yes.
have a
Okay, let's
part
go. Let's
two.
go there.
So a
Oh,
week.
wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got it. I got it. I got it. It's quick. It's quick. Okay. What we know is that if we imagine being in the gym and lifting weights, they've done studies where they've got two different groups of people that are very similar. Zora, you know what I'm talking about. And just by imagining yourself being in the gym, lifting the weights, hearing the sounds, smelling the smells, listening to the music, doing whatever you're going to do, it increases our muscle mass by 13%. Bananas. This is
Yep.
how we use our brain to hack our physical health. It's extraordinary. We must not forget that we have this superpower inside of our cranium, and we've not been given the manual on how to use it well. And so any little tidbit like that is helpful. I will be looking up the Katsu bands. Thank you very much for telling me about that.
Well, who needs the Katsu bands when you can thought alone build muscle? I mean, you're talking to someone who just came back from the Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat. So I
Oh,
am all about thought
I
alone controlling the body. But it's not only thought alone, but there's an emotion. He talks about it's you got to have an emotion attached to it in order to really get the physiological effects, which makes sense. I mean, if you're about to be hit by a car and you freak out, and then of course
yeah,
cortisol is going to start running and
a
all that,
hundred
because
percent.
you're emotional
Yeah.
about it. I'm like, I just almost died. So, of course, there has to, but we need to redo the reverse, right? Be happy and
Yes.
joyful and all
And I
that.
will say, Dr. Joe's, please, if anybody's listening and does not know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is, please go to his website, educate yourself. He's amazing. I was fortunate enough to have him as one of my teachers in chiropractic college. I know. So
No.
him and Bruce Lipton, both of them.
Oh,
I know.
wow. Oh
I know
my
those
gosh.
those days.
I'm
I
so
know.
unworthy.
So I've been a student of his for a really long time. And by the way, his new meditation on the Brain Blessing Center, so good.
I know. I know. It's so, I can feel it. I mean, I'm not one of these woo people, but I'm like, I think I can
Oh,
feel
I
it.
am. I'm 100% woo, just so everybody knows. Your editor's going to cut this for sure. Maybe not.
Let's
It's
keep
all
it in.
good.
All right, Fiona, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to have you in a part two because I have so many more questions for you. But I would love for you to just quickly tell us about your brain health master course for women and the Menopause Doula program. I'm a little confused
Yes.
on the two.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of throw this back both at you. So the Brain Health Master Course for Women was something I created in the pandemic year because I was suffering the stress of that year and my brain just shut off. And I thought, what the hell am I going to do? And I was like, wait a minute. you're a clinical neuroscientist. You got this. You can figure this out. So I put together a program for myself, which turned around what I was feeling was a real sort of brain fog and forgetfulness and a bunch of other things and the stress of that year. And then I put it into a program, and I do a launch of it once a year. It's typically in the fall, although sometimes it can be in the spring. I haven't set it yet for 2024, but it basically is built around something called the Brain Health Matrix, which are the 8 pieces that we need in order to secure our brain health, no matter our age or our diagnosis or wherever we are in the stage, whatever life stage we're at. It's specifically for women, but most of these things are also applicable for the guys too. There is a
Nice.
waitlist link that I've given you. You're welcome to share. And so I'll be emailing the people on the waitlist as soon as I have a date for that. And then I also have a menopause doula certification. So basically I teach women, it's been women so far, how to coach other women through the menopause transition. And I just think we need as many voices and as many helpers as we can. So if you're listening to this and you've been touched by what I've been saying, then the doula certification might be for you. We will be launching that school in the fall, and there is a wait list for that as well.
Put me on that list. I would love to learn more. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Dr. Fiona. I will have links to all of this information in the show notes. Any studies that you mentioned, if you can, send it to me so we can also take a deeper dive if you remember any of them. And Instagram, TikTok, your website, your podcast, Not Your Mother's Menopause. Brilliant name. And I have links to that in the show notes too. So I really appreciate your time. Is there any last words you have for women going through the menopause transition?
You're not alone. It feels super isolating. And what I will say is resist the urge to isolate yourself like an unwell member of society. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is gain safety, and reach out to somebody else who can understand what you're going through. And please know that you are absolutely not alone. And I keep being told by the wise ones ahead of me that it does get better.
It does. It
It does. I
does.
love that. So that's what I would tell you. Just don't languish feeling in a place where you feel bad, that you don't have to be alone. There's so many resources for you. And 50% of the population, 1 billion of us in the next few years will be in the menopause transition. So we are a force to be reckoned with.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of women. Wonderful. I can't wait to have you on for a part 2, and have a wonderful day, Fiona. And I will see you next time.
Indeed. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the chat today.